Baylor football has the toughest first-month schedule in America, but it's actually kind of perfect. Let's get locked on Baylor.
You are Locked On Baylor, your daily podcast on the Baylor Bears. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello there, Bears fans. Happy Wednesday to you. Welcome to another episode of Locked On Baylor, brought to you by FanDuel. It's part of the Locked On Podcast Network, where it's your team every day. I'm your host, Cam Stewart of ESPN Central Texas and The Cam Show on Rogue Media Sports Network. Appreciate you making it your first listen today and every day. Today, let's take a deeper dive into the schedule and why Baylor has the toughest first month of anyone in college football, why they're going to get through it, and what are some of the marquee games around the conference that Baylor fans are going to need to keep an eye on if they're going to be marching towards that Big 12 championship. Plus, we will recap the night that was in Lubbock on the hardwood. All that and more coming up on Locked On Baylor. The schedule to me is fascinating for Baylor. Obviously, it's the first kind of glimpse we get at football season. You know, we could do like the Mike and the Mad Dog thing. On the road, Oklahoma State, dog. That's a loss, Mikey. You know, we could do that whole thing. But honestly, I said it on the show yesterday. If Baylor can be undefeated through September, they're going to go undefeated. I know it's never happened in Baylor history, but if they can get through that first month, they can do that. And it's because Baylor has the toughest first month of anyone in college football. Like, no doubt, brother. Well, as soon as they put Arizona State in that September 20th week, then you knew, like, this is going to be the toughest possible schedule that Baylor could front load anyway. 2 playoff teams in the first month, and Auburn, an SEC team that everyone seems to be pretty high on in this offseason. Auburn week 1 at home, week 2 on the road against a playoff team, right, in SMU, and one that I think will be okay. I don't know that they're playoff caliber necessarily next year, but will be a good team still. Samford at home. Bobby Bowden went there, so take that for what that's worth. Football pedigree. Then Arizona State, September 20th at home. And Oklahoma State, September 27th, I find to be quite interesting because obviously that's never like an easy place to just go and get a win, except when it's the year 2024. And I truly believe Oklahoma State has to be better, has to be significantly better this year. I don't expect them to be up and competing for the conference championship or anything like that. But if there was ever a time for Mike Gundy to be on the hot seat, 2025 is it. You know, like he could have some heat coming down on him if they don't win this year, because they will have gone from a team that was in the Big 12 championship for the second time in 3 seasons in 2023, and a team that was bringing it all back to then back-to-back losing seasons potentially in 24 and 25. Like, if it gets to that, Mike Gundy's in trouble. Okay, so that early in the season where Oklahoma State, you know, still doesn't know any better, still don't know that they're not supposed to be, you know, not supposed to be a bad team again. They could have some confidence going into that one, and their schedule leading up to that is kind of easy. And I say kind of because they play Tennessee Martin to start week 1. And then they go to Oregon. Cam, what are you smoking? How in any way is that easy? It's not. But they're playing with total house money, guys. I mean, truly. Like, you just go up there. You try to do some things well. No one expects you to win the game. They could lose by 40, and it's still not the end of the world. Then they play Tulsa the next week and then host Baylor. So for the most part, you're kind of easing into that. You know, you measure yourself where you are against Oregon, but no one expects you to win, and it's not a conference game. So they can kind of ease their way into this Baylor game. I don't like that. And then the next week, you're playing Kansas State. Again, at home, but I'm kind of lumping that into the first month. The first that is the first 6 games of the year right there, the first half of the season. After that, it's more or less fine. right? Like TCU away is never easy, but you should be a better team than TCU this year, and that's coming off a bye week. Cincinnati away, let's be serious. Get real here. UCF at home, homecoming, like that matchup. Then another idle week before you take on Utah, also at home. A team that you should be better than, but hey, if we're going to believe in Vegas, Vegas always knows something. Maybe Utah is much better than last year. Okay, you get them at home off a bye week. So there alleviates a lot of my concern there. Arizona away. I said it on the show yesterday. Arizona could shock some people and be a 7 or 8 win team. They could be awful. They could be like a 2-3 win team. They could be pretty bad. And then UH at home. There's someone we're going to have in the afternoon, the evening edition, who believes in this UH team. I do not. I have that as a scrimmage to end the season. So again, like I said yesterday, if Baylor goes through the first 4 games undefeated, they're going to be undefeated. But that, that doesn't typically happen. Baylor doesn't go 12-0. It's never happened. So even if let's play it out that they're 2-2, which would not be ideal. But let's say you beat Auburn, you lose to SMU, you beat Samford, and then you lose to Arizona State. It's not the end of the world, but it's not great. And honestly, after that, Baylor could go 8-0, 7-1, maybe, but 8-0 to put them at 10-2 and probably gets them in the Big 12 championship game. That's what we like in college football. College football is very much a what have you done for me lately kind of deal. And so if you're going to lose a couple games, lose them in September. And then get really hot towards the end of the season, and you look much more attractive to the committee. Like BYU lost, 2 of their last 3 or 4 games last year. And then all of a sudden, nobody liked them, even though they won 10 and then an 11th in the bowl game. But those last 4 games, 5 games even, Utah is the only one that can scare you a little bit. And all we've talked about is how overrated Utah is. Cincinnati, UCF, Utah, Arizona, Houston. That should be a 5-game winning streak at least, even if you trip up against TCU like you like to do. So it is the toughest month of anyone, the first month of the season of anyone in the country. But that is going to play into Baylor's favor when it comes to, being in contention for a playoff spot and playing for the Big 12 championship. Because when it comes to, obviously, to play in the conference championship, you've got to take care of business. You got to be one of the 2 best teams, thankfully. But when it comes down to the committee and what that next step is, if you do, get to the conference championship game and lose, for example, they will look at a team that's like, okay, they lost the conference championship, but they won 7 in a row. They won 8 in a row going into this, and they beat this team that we didn't expect them to, and we beat this team. And so that helps more than losing 2 tough games. Losing 2 tough games, this is the easiest way to put it. Losing 2 tough games in September is way better than losing 2 tough games in November. Just is. Not fair, but that's just how it is. And there are some fascinating matchups on the schedule this year across our great conference, which of course has Baylor in it, and ones that Baylor will have eyes on. Let's go over the games of the Big 12 season. That's next on Locked On Baylor. But first, how about FanDuel, guys? Super Bowl 59 is here. 1 game, 2 teams, endless possibilities. And there's no better way to make every play more exciting than with FanDuel Sportsbook. Whether it's predicting the first touchdown, calling the MVP, or even betting on the coin toss, FanDuel makes it easy to get in on the action. With live betting all game long, you can adjust your bets as the game unfolds and feel the thrill from kickoff to the final whistle. And it's so easy to do, guys. So easy. Download the app or head to FanDuel.com to get started. Bet just $5, and if you win, you'll score $200 in bonus bets. That's FanDuel.com. Bet with FanDuel, official partner of Super Bowl 59. Thankfully, I think Baylor's going to be in a position where they're scoreboard watching throughout most of this year. I don't know if you guys are like me, but I like when Baylor's out of it in October, November, 2 years ago when they were 3-9, Like I don't watch a ton of college football outside of that when my team sucks. Like it doesn't bring me the joy. But when they're good, my whole Saturday is dedicated to it. Who's losing? Who's getting upset? Who's shocking some people? Like I'm plugged in all day. And I hope that's the latter is the way that Baylor's and their fans are going to be throughout this season of scoreboard watching and watching with a ton of intrigue at the Big 12, who the committee likes, who's getting disrespected, because we'll be doing segments on that all season long. So I went and looked around, like, what are the best games in this conference, Baylor or otherwise, that are going to fascinate us, captivate us throughout this season. And honestly, when I looked at this and looking at the non-conference games, I try not to do many non-cons. I do have one on here that's of particular interest. But dude, like, look at these, man. Arizona plays Hawaii and Weber State. Arizona State plays Northern Arizona and basically a group of 4 team in Mississippi State. Texas State is the toughest game they have in the first 3. BYU, Portland State and Stanford and East Carolina. Okay, UCF, Jacksonville State, Northwestern State on Cincinnati. And here's Baylor, Auburn at SMU. Samford, sure, but then they play Arizona State, which is the first game that has a ton of intrigue to me. Baylor and Arizona State, September the 20th. It's at McLane. It's going to be, I think, like a couple years ago when you played Oklahoma State in that first conference game, where there was a lot of hype to it, and it was a top 20 matchup, and neither team ended up being there at the end of the race. Neither team was very good that year, but it was a very entertaining game, very hyped up game. So the hype of that certainly has me thinking about that Oklahoma State game. I hope the results are different. I hope Baylor wins and both teams are good, unlike that Oklahoma State game. But that is the first kind of litmus test that we have in the Big 12 this season, with an asterisk next to it, which I'll get to in a minute. But Baylor and Arizona State are definitely 2 teams that have the hopes to get to Arlington and play for the Big 12 championship. Obviously, Arizona State is the defending champs. Everyone's going to say, can they run it back? The Big 12 is a wild conference. Can a team even go back-to-back these days? Sam Leavitt versus Sawyer Robertson. I hope Sawyer's up for that game because everyone's talking about how Sam Leavitt's a better quarterback for some reason, and we know it's Sawyer. So that is going to have plenty of storylines to it. And I said put an asterisk as being the first litmus test for the Big 12 season, because there is a huge Big 12 matchup in week 1. It just happens to be at a neutral site on a different continent. Okay. Farmageddon, baby. Kansas State, Iowa State in Ireland, Dublin, week 1 of the season. Better matchup than what we had last year, Georgia Tech, Florida State. I love that game. Part of me hates that it's not on campus and it's not during rivalry week, but if this is going to be the compromise, that's fine. Because you guys know it's going to be probably the only good game in that time slot in that week, maybe of the whole day in week 0. The nation is going to turn its attention to this Big 12 game, this underrated rivalry, and with 2 teams who could also very, very well be in Arlington in the first weekend in December. I love that matchup. Not to be outdone of great Big 12 games very early in the season. How about this? I think it's going to be Labor Day is when it's going to happen. TCU, where do they open? None other than Chapel Hill, North Carolina. Bill Belichick's first game in charge is against a Big 12 opponent. And it's not just that. There's a ton of intrigue in the college football world for that one. Poor TCU. They get Deion's first Big 12 game, or first game. And then Bill Belichick's first game as a college coach. There's obviously going to be a ton of intrigue around that, but I'm also fascinated by this TCU team. At points last year, they looked like one of the 3 or 4 best teams in the conference. They looked like at points they had the best offense in the conference. I think Baylor overtook them for that. Kansas certainly had their moments as well. Colorado had a good run, but TCU should be a very potent offensive team coming into this year. They looked like they were melting at first. That defense stunk, and the defense didn't get terribly better the rest of the season. They didn't have a run game. I'm really intrigued to see what Kendall Briles is doing with that TCU offense, because if they can put a couple wins together at the beginning of the season and Josh Hoover shows that he's got one of that great arm and one of the great passing offenses in the Big 12, they could be in the mix here. Like if they start off hot, 3-1, 4-0, something like that, don't be surprised if they stay in the mix maybe even longer than Texas Tech does. By the way, let's talk about Texas Tech, because this one, I mean, these all tickle my interest, but this one fascinates me. September 20th, the same day as Baylor, Arizona State, Texas Tech is on the road at Utah. Tech does not have a good non-conference schedule, and they could be easing into this game, or this could be the first trip up of the season. So Tech starts with Arkansas Pine Bluff, Kent State, Oregon State, all at home. And then they open the Big 12 schedule at Utah. Like I said in the first segment, Utah is either going to be like 5-7 again, which I think they'll be closer to that than they are to 10-2, which is like the other here is they're either going to be just below a bowl game and not very good, or they're going to be right in this race. And Tech is everyone's dark horse every year. This is where we find it out. Rice-Eccles, very tough place to play. They're going to be up for this game in terms of like their fans thinking that this is their year again. They have a couple of tricky ones leading up to that. At UCLA, not a great team, not a great home atmosphere, but you never know. It's another Power 4 team. Cal Poly, and then at Wyoming. Ask Tech how that can go. That's not always easy. And this would be obviously their conference opener, and then they got to look to a game at West Virginia the next week. So they could trap themselves here. But if Utah's going to be good, we're going to find out in that Tech game, win or close loss. That's what we're going to find out. I think we're going to find out a lot about those two teams in September. So that one is a big one for me. Also in September, they're doing so many of these in September, man. In fact, all of the ones I have are in September. How crazy is that? That's how much the Big 12 bungled rivalry week. The rematch, BYU, Colorado, September 27th. Obviously, that had a ton of intrigue in the Alamo Bowl last year. BYU put a real hurting on that Colorado team. We don't know what Colorado team is showing up in 2025. And if they're going to be any good, they're going to be real pissed off going into that game at home against BYU, the team that knocked them out in the bowl game last year. A lot of good storylines going into that one. And then the final one I'm kind of looking at here, also again in September, Kansas State at Arizona on the 13th, which is also the same day as the Backyard Brawl, by the way, if you're looking for non-con games. Pitt and West Virginia, obviously always a great one. But Arizona, as I've said a couple times now, they can be sneaky. I don't think there's a world where they're very good, but they can be sneaky or they can really suck. And I think we're going to learn some more on September 13th after Kansas State beats or takes on Iowa State. I think they might lose that game. They have a couple of cream puffs, and then they're out on the road at Arizona. It's going to be like 1,000 degrees. This is where we could learn something about Arizona. And obviously, if Kansas State loses, we could see them as pretenders. But I do want to take another moment. We talked about it from the Tech perspective yesterday, how much the Big 12 just does not handle their rivalries well. And it just stinks. Like we've been talking about Baylor TCU rivalry week every year. Once again, they're not there. And Jamie Plunkett was actually commenting on that. He covers TCU, does some Dave Campbell stuff. I think he works for 247 as well. He tweets this: the Big 12 has 4 protected rivalries: Arizona, Arizona State, BYU, Utah, TCU, Baylor, Kansas, Kansas State. Those are the only 4 in which those teams are going to play every year, no matter what. Only one of them is played on rivalry week in 2025. How does that make sense? Big 12, get out of your own way here. As I said yesterday, Utah does not care if they play UCF. Tech does not care if they ever play Cincinnati. What they do care about, Tech, is playing Baylor and TCU. What Utah cares about is playing BYU and, I don't know, maybe Colorado becomes one, that kind of Pac-12 border war. Like, give us what we want and when we want it. I'm sick of this excuse of like, oh, well, nobody's going to watch TCU versus Baylor over the Iron Bowl. Of course they're not nationally, but they're not going to watch it over Alabama, Georgia, or whatever other game you put in on that day. You know what I mean? Other big SEC or Big Ten game you're going to put in that day. But if you play it on rivalry week, it means something. They still play the Egg Bowl on rivalry week, even though no one's going to watch Ole Miss, Mississippi State over UT and A&M. Doesn't matter. It's a rivalry. You signify it as a rivalry, and those things really boost up your conference. So get out of your own way, man. Put the rivalries on rivalry week. Like if I had to go another year after this one where Baylor's not playing TCU in the rivalry in week 12, game number 12, we might need to blow this whole thing up. Anyway, let me know what you guys think down in the comments below. Let's go over that game against Texas Tech last night. Let's do it next on Locked On Baylor. Scott Drew's Bears drop another one on the road, 73-59 against Texas Tech. A little bit more of a breakdown here, but I do recommend on the channel, both on the podcast form and on YouTube, we do have the full post-game show that we're doing after almost every Baylor basketball game. That kind of gives you a full breakdown of this thing, but frustrating for sure. 73-59 is the final, and honestly, it felt like Baylor at times should have lost by 20. 14 probably feels about right. The way they were playing most of the game kind of gets away from them a little bit at the end, but let's say this first. I'll get the excuses out of the way first. Baylor's been shorthanded most of this year, and they will be shorthanded the rest of the year, even though no one's been officially ruled out with a season-ending injury. But, missing Langston Love is much different from missing VJ Edgecombe. And they didn't have VJ Edgecombe last night. Well, they didn't have either of those guys last night, but they didn't have VJ Edgecombe, and that's a huge difference with this team. As we've seen, like Rob Wright's been great, and Norchad every couple games has real standout performance like he did against Kansas. But really the turnaround in the season, if you can call it that, the way that Baylor's looked better in recent games is because of VJ. And not having him out there, they were just so lost offensively. Like there's just no offense. There's no offense without VJ. We got to get Jake Spavital in that building, man. Something to score some points. The metrics with this team are still so misleading. You remember Brad Brownell last year saying that the Big 12 pads their stats in the non-con. I still don't think that's true, but certainly if you want to isolate Baylor's offense, then they are. And they're still, top 20, 25 in the country in points per game and success rate and whatever the hell. But you watch the game. They're not a good offensive team. They're not a particularly stellar offensive team even with VJ out there, but certainly not with him not out there, where they score. They're held under 60 points for the game against, again, a very good Tech team. But they shot 28% from three, 34% from the floor. And there's no stat tracking for how many missed layups they had, but it was somewhere in the bazillion range. Like it was incredible. It was an exhibition on how to smoke layups. It was tough to watch at times. But this was another scheduled loss. I talked about this on the post game, but like this loss in and of itself, I don't want to say whatever, because no loss is just whatever, but like that happens. You're playing a team that's better than you. You don't have your best player. Like that happens. But looking at this as a whole product, specifically this year, but you could go back to last year and the year before as well. They don't win big road games. Like that's what you have to do to succeed in this league or in any league. You have to win games on the road in real road environments. And this team is incapable of that. And this program might be incapable of that from what we've seen the last couple of years after having such a good 3-year run of it from obviously 2020 through 2022. But you look at the games this year that they played, not in Waco, that were in, biased gyms, I guess, gyms that looked like it was suited for college basketball in terms of the atmosphere. Like, so that's not counting Utah. That's not counting Arizona State. You look at the other games, Gonzaga, UConn, Arizona, Iowa State, BYU, Tech. What's the common denominator? They lost every friggin' time, every single time. And maybe one of those was by single digits? Was UConn ended up being single digits? The rest were blowouts, dude. Gonzaga, you lose by 40. Arizona, you lost by 20. This game, you lost by 14. Iowa State, you lost by 17 or 19. Like, they can't even keep it close in these road games, man. And you use the excuse, the Big 12's got all these great environments, and that's true. It's tough to win on the road. It is, but you have to do it sometimes. Like, that's an excuse you use here or there, but you should win 2 out of 5 of those if you're a pretty good team. And that's still a losing record on the road, but you catch what I mean? Like, Kansas State's not going to make the tournament this year. They rolled over Iowa State in Hilton on Saturday. Teams with a spine and balls, they come away with wins like that every once in a while. Or more often than not sometimes. The really good teams. Baylor's not a really good team. You just have to kind of deal with what they are. I mean, I think it's fair to call the Kansas game a fluke, seeing as you lost in overtime. I guess that BYU game was one they did lose by single digits, to go back to my other point. You lost in overtime to BYU in a game that you were pretty lucky to get to overtime, and then you got crushed in this game. So, it seems like kind of a fluky second half because Kansas doesn't win on the road either. But it just stinks. It's something that sticks in the craw. Again, this game in particular, you were going to lose it. But to just consistently for 3 years in a row now not be able to win these big games on the road, it's predictable. I mean, you turn on the station last night, you turn on ESPN2, and the place is jumping. It's sold out Tuesday night. People in the post game talking about how great the Tech fans are. They're right, and you knew they had no shot. They had no shot. And again, the numbers are a bit deceiving if you watch the game. Like, if you watch that game, you would be stunned to see that they had the same amount of rebounds as Tech. Like, they got their butts kicked on the boards, and their butts kicked in the paint in terms of just again, maybe not even just the points in the paint, but how many missed opportunities Baylor had in the paint. Because points in the paint, Tech only outscored them by 4. And yet they seemed like such a dominant team down low versus Baylor. So, look, this team's, the Kansas win was great. Lord knows I had a bunch of fun with it. We all did. And I'm not taking away from that. That's still on the record. But you've got to have some more. You got to have some more marquee wins. And, it doesn't help that I don't think you have Tech at home this year. You don't have Iowa State at home. Both those teams on the road exclusively. You've got Houston on the road next week, a place where they never lose except against this really good Tech team. You've got to win all your home games the rest of the season. You have to. In order to feel safe in the NCAA tournament field, because they're still on that 9 line. And this game last night, that doesn't help them. It does not help them, especially when the committee sees that they lost by 14. It doesn't help. Anyway, let me know what you guys think down in the comment section below. Is this the toughest Baylor football schedule they've ever had, at least for the first month of September? Let me know down in the comments below. What are the games you're looking forward to? And can this team push for a real NCAA tournament bid? And what I mean by real is that we're not sitting and, biting our fingernails to the bone. There's no bones in fingernails on Selection Sunday. Please let me know down in the comments below. It's late. I'm sorry. I'm using these analogies that don't even make sense. Let me know down in the comments below. Be sure to like and subscribe. Find us wherever you get your podcasts. That's a super big help. That's, I know, the way that I consume it for all our Locked On shows. So let me know in the comment section below. Like and subscribe helps the channel a ton. And we will see you later on today. Actually, we're going to talk a little more college basketball, why Bill Self should be fired. The reason might just shock you. That's coming up later in the evening edition of Locked On Baylor.